Welcome everyone to this wonderful, wonderful Tuesday night. We're really excited to be here. I am Elizabeth Keeper. I'm a books editor at Refinery 29, and of course, this is the lady herself. So hello. And I wanted to kick off tonight by just saying, like, what a weird coincidence. We're talking about tonight and it's the 200th anniversary of Jane Austen's death.
I know, we were saying backstage, we wish it was like the 200th anniversary of her birthday, or her, like not quite as festive, but.
Yeah, so we'll make it festive anyway. But I wanted to start off just by asking, like, when did you first encounter Jane Austen's writing and also Pride and Prejudice?
So first, I have to say thank you all so much for coming. This is, and thank you to Random House for hosting. I feel like we were also saying sort of backstage that I feel like it's almost like you're coming into like the home of my employer or something. But and thank you, Elizabeth. This is very exciting. By the way, then we'll go back to talk. I did at like session at 5:15. I like ate sushi with a fork, and I was like, I don't think it's because I'm a Midwesterner that I did, like, it's like not fair to like sort of, whatever, like group all, but I was like, I felt like, I feel so much like myself, like, and then I was like, okay, now I can go to my late night event at anyway, so my exposure to Austen and my exposure to Pride and Prejudice were simultaneous. When I was a junior in high school for my English class, we were assigned Pride and Prejudice, and I loved it. I mean, I was a sort of uneven student in high school and did well in English and history and did very, very badly in a lot of other classes. But so I often enjoyed the reading that we had to do. But I felt like I felt this particular sense of excitement or giddiness reading Pride and Prejudice, and did think like, this counts as homework and I get credit for it, and I think I did like read ahead, and so I loved Austen right away from then on.
Do you have any particular recollection of what it was that you loved, or why you connected to that as opposed to?
Well, I feel like I've said this like an embarrassing number of times since the book was, it's just the beginning of our embarrassing night together. So the book was published, Eligible was published in April 2016, and it does happen to be true, but I feel like the more times I say it, it becomes like a little more embarrassing. I'm waiting for someone to be like, ew, or whatever. So 2 boys in my high school class, I went to boarding school, said that I reminded them of Elizabeth Bennet. And this was like, not only was it was like literally probably the highest praise of my life, and definitely the highest praise of my high school. So that's why, I felt like it was like, she's so like charming. I've like worked hard to make myself more charming, but let's just say like it was like I don't think everyone would have seen that comparison, but I did. I just thought it was so funny, and I thought it was so romantic, and I actually spoke to a reporter from USA Today for an article that came out today in honor of the 200th anniversary of her death, and one of the questions was, why do we sort of still love Austen? Why do so many people? And there's a lot of ways to answer that question, as we might do tonight. But I do think, she has this really incisive class commentary, and she can be really mocking of some of her characters, but then she also can give you that like swoony feeling where you're like, oh, I hope those 2 people kiss each other, and that's like a really wide range, and to do both those things, one, there might be readers who like don't care about the kissing, although I think a lot do, and do care about the class commentary, and then there might be people who don't care about the class commentary and do care about the kissing, but I think that the way she blends them is really special and exceptional.
Mm-hmm. Especially when you're a teenager.
Especially when you're a teenager. Right, and it's also, she is, as sort of classic books go, I think she is pretty accessible, so you can, I think people can feel good about their own intelligence while reading Austen.
One of the things in a Times piece I was reading that came out this week, we were kind of going back and forth on, was this author was writing about sort of the fallacy that she was very private about her writing and how she did it in secret, and how that myth is something that has been propagated over the last 2 centuries and quite frankly isn't true. And I guess I wanted to ask you, what is it about that mythology that has been so attractive for so long, and why now is it something, in the cultural moment that we live in, and particularly in the moment for women as writers, that it's actually, no, we reject that.
Right, it's a super interesting question. So this piece was basically, which is by an Austen scholar and professor who I had read in a separate article. She also does roller derby and goes by the name Stone Cold Jane Austen. And I was I don't know very much about her, but I was I think I like this woman. So she was saying that I think maybe it was Austen's nephew who, after her death, really wrote a book kind of building up this idea that, there was a squeaky door and she would know that someone was coming and hide her writing, and she was saying, this woman who I think her last name is Lucer, was saying that actually, Austen shared her work with her family and friends and got feedback. And the funny thing is, actually, in high school, I think I liked the idea. I heard that as early as high school, this idea that she hid her writing. And I liked that idea because I think that I hid my writing. And then because, as I said, I did very poorly in a lot of my classes, there came some moment when I realized, I can do this relatively well. And it's almost I don't have enough skills that I can conceal the one thing that I, do know how to do. But I think it might be a version of, I'm sure most people in this room know, the sort of phenomenon of the manic pixie dream girl in movies, who is often supposed to be I don't know, how would you define, very quirky and
It's Zooey Deschanel, that's
or
circa 500 Days of Summer,
which I actually haven't even seen. But the other, I know, I had some years where I was I was reproducing and I didn't really see movies. But the other one, what's that movie with Zach? But Garden State with Natalie Portman. So I think it's this very, very pretty young, cute, young woman who's not very aware of her own cute. It's almost she has this part I might be making up, but she has a little flower on her nose because she's been baking cookies or whatever. And so I feel there was actually an interesting Q&A over the weekend with Jenny Slate, the comedian or actress, in the New York Times Magazine, where it was it was sort of all weirdly worded but very interesting, where she was almost saying, I present myself as a mess, and my career has just kind of been this random series. And I think there's a lot of complicated things about gender and how narrow a sort of a set of traits is widely acceptable in women. And so therefore I do think that in a way it allows, it's almost maybe we allow Austen to be sort of subversive as a writer if we're oh, she was very conventional as a person, or she was very modest or something, because we don't want her to be really, I don't know, assertive or something, which it's also weird to impose contemporary definitions or ways of describing people on someone who lived 200 years ago, but it's also irresistible.
Right.
And I'm sure we'll get to the was Jane Austen a feminist question.
Well, with that in mind, was Jane Austen? That is coming. I swear we're going to talk about it. But God, is this happening? Am I okay? Am I blowing anyone's ears? Okay. So we're going to dive into Eligible a little bit, and just anecdotally, I reread this book this weekend after reading it initially when it came out, and people stepped away from me on the subway because I was laughing so hard. So thank you for that, because there's never enough personal space. So, obviously we know where the inspiration was taken from, but like, when did it occur? When did you have like a light bulb moment that you were like, I have lighted upon Pride and Prejudice. I'm going to rework it in the age of, trans movements and, reality dating shows and all of that jazz.
So actually, it was more like external than internal, in the sense that I was approached by a British publisher who was these two editors had kind of gotten together, and they said, we're going to do something called the Austen Project, and we're going to invite contemporary writers, 6 contemporary writers, to tell their own version of each of Austen's 6 novels. And they had invited, Joanna Trollope was sort of assigned to Sense and Sensibility. Ultimately, Alexander McCall Smith did Emma, and the Scottish mystery writer Val McDermott did Northanger Abbey. So it was something where I actually don't think I would have had this idea on my own, and I don't think I ever would have thought that someone else would give me the idea for my novel. So initially, this was in December 2011. And I think that I maybe even started to type an email that was kind of like, thank you so much for thinking of me, but I'm going to... And I was in the middle of writing another novel, a novel called Sisterland, which takes place basically in like contemporary St. Louis, and it's about adult sisters. So it was very different. And then I thought to myself, like, I could... And one thing I should say is that any of you in this room could write a contemporary Pride and Prejudice, and literally some of you probably have or will, but like, it's not like you don't need special permission from the estate of Jane Austen because of expired copyright. Like, so it wasn't the fact that this British publisher was initiating it. It was more like, they had the infrastructure to like get publicity for it, or they would promote it, or they would pay writers to do it. But it wasn't, obviously other versions of this exist. So then I just started to think to myself, like, and the book that Sisterland is a little bit like dark and a little bit creepy, like maybe creepier than my other books. And I thought, I could sit at my desk for like 2 or 3 years and just exist in the world of Pride and Prejudice, and someone would pay me for it. And like, almost like, how could I possibly say no to that? And I even thought, it'll make me use my brain in a different way. So I went to graduate school for creative writing, and I earned an MFA in 2001. And there's this guy, this classmate that I haven't seen since, but he made this haunting, and to be fair to him, accurate comment, which was, one time in a writing workshop, he said, Curtis, whenever you describe a character's breath, it's always bad. And I kind of, like, I thought of him, and I thought, well, what if, instead of like describing a sort of romantic scene, or like a couple, kissing or becoming sexually involved, and like it's really awkward, and like one or both of them is gonna regret it, and it's gonna end in like remorse. Like, what if I knew that I was writing a book toward a happy ending? Like, how would that change the writing process, and how would that change, like, almost like the emotions that I was existing in while I wrote? And so I just thought, like, this would be fun, and I'll try it. So again, it was December, and I decided that over Christmas I would reread Pride and Prejudice and see if I had concrete ideas. And so I started reading, and like from the first page I thought, I definitely have ideas. And the thing, so my husband said to me at the time, he said, you have to be prepared to be severely criticized. And I kind of said, like, oh, well, and I still actually agree with this, but like I said, whatever book you write, you'll be criticized, and I will say, like, I mean, there's been sort of strong reactions in different ways to this book. He was right to some extent. Like I was severely, within the context of writing a novel, which there are worse things than being severely criticized for your novel. But yeah. So I didn't think. I mean, one time I bizarrely, this is sort of a weird comparison, but I wrote an article about. I wrote a profile of Barbara Walters for Vanity Fair. And again, I feel like a few people, probably including my husband, were almost like, "What are you thinking? Like that'll be so intimidating." And she interviews everybody, and I thought to myself, like, no, I'll be like a generic reporter, and it won't. And I kind of felt this way, like I was like, I'll just write this book, and myself is detached from the book. And sorry that I'm like making all these weird microphone noises, but and then of course it did come back to, but I was one time interviewing Barbara Walters. Partly it was in person, partly it was on the phone, and I literally sweated through my shirt because she was so intimidating. And with this book, there were times when I think people were like, just leave Jane Austen alone, and did it, but really, who cares?
Can you remind me of the years when you were writing it?
Yeah. Okay. So I was in the middle of this other book, and so therefore I think that I started in 2013 and finished in 2015.
The reason I'm particularly asking that is I think one of the things that, obviously we're revisiting a story that is centuries old, but also as I was rereading it this weekend, I was thinking about our current socio-economic climate and sort of the post-recession world that we live in, and people who Mr. and Mrs. Bennett are maybe have a good name and have this life that they've built for themselves, but perhaps it isn't the life that they can any longer afford, and downsizing, and your children leaving, you wanting them to leave, but maybe they're failing to launch, but actually don't want them to leave. So there's obviously a lot of interesting tensions that come out of that. But were you aware of that as you were digging into this, or did it just fit really naturally in the story that you were already telling?
Was I aware of the sort of economic situation?
I think, yes, no, I know you're aware of the economic situation. I mean more in terms of injecting it or putting a fine point on it within the plot. I was just thinking about the Bennets as I too am a Midwesterner, and I was thinking about the Bennets as my parents who, downsized homes in the post-aughts.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. I remember the teen.
Yeah.
So I think that I felt like actually one of the ways that I tried to construct a plot was to think almost about some of it was literal plot twists in Pride and Prejudice, and then some of it was almost more these are the emotions that are elicited in the characters, and what's something contemporary that could happen to elicit, especially it's much harder to scandalize someone in 2013 than in the early 1800s. But I did, obviously part of Mrs. Bennet's sort of agitation about the Bennet in Pride and Prejudice, about the Bennett family maybe losing their house or not having a son. Mm-hmm. There is a very sort of concrete aspect. It's not just she wants to have some sort of security, and so I wanted my Bennets to be in danger of losing their house in some similar way. I did want them to have to be almost a family that considered themselves fancy, whatever that means, but then actually doesn't have much in their savings account.
Mm-hmm. I think too, sort of a similar tack when we look at all of the sisters and the different archetypes of the sisters could represent, and the things that they go after. So spoiler, we're talking spoilers, we've all read this book, right? So when Lydia marries Ham, and I think Miss Bennet's reaction to that is so funny, and is so honest and real, and the way that Darcy explains it to her is so at once insane, but also the only way you can talk to a particular sort of person about a particular sort of issue. And
although I will say, so people have different reactions to that. I mean, not surprising. People have different reactions to everything, and I think there are people who are not. I'm sure people in this room who do not like that plot line. They do not, or they think. I think they think that it's not completely like, maybe, I don't know if respectful is the right word on my part, because as you may or may not have picked up on, I divided the character of Wickham into two, because he does so many things in Pride and Prejudice, and a lot of what I was trying to do, there's this weird balance between, the story is not particularly realistic, but not making it seem like realism has just been totally like thrown to the side, and so I wanted, like, and that's one of the reasons, I made Jane and Lizzie much older, because it's like, even if Mrs. Bennet is this sort of person whose, concerns are not grounded in reality, she still couldn't be panicked about having like a 22-year-old daughter who's not married, which is like how old they are in Pride and Prejudice. And so anyway, so I feel like there are people who I think maybe conflate, if some readers conflate some of the characters' views towards Ham, like with what my own views are, which again, that's not, I would in general caution people not to read, like, you can't, it's pretty hard to discern a novelist's like almost like political views or social views from fiction, but again, people do try. But again, that's one of the things that some people like that and some people are not fully on board as readers, which is fun.
Well, one of the things that I did like was how each sister, and even to a degree Sally, like we have this like different way of being female in the world right now. We're getting towards our feminist question. But like it's fast, like it's really to have Jane be like older and trying to have a child on her own, and then to have Lizzie who is sort of like, we'll see what happens, and then the rest of the girls have their own stories. And I don't know if this was intentional, and I would like to know, which is why I'm asking you, but I did think it was like a very interesting montage of like all of the choices that there are for women right now to be happy in their own lives.
Yeah, I would say that was intentional, that I think that even though Mrs. Bennet doesn't agree with his view, like I definitely think that there are like many ways to construct a life for yourself, and actually several people have said to me, that when Lizzie says she doesn't want children, that that they assume, several people who don't have kids by choice have said, I assumed that you were going to make her like reverse that choice by the end, and I was so glad that you didn't. And a friend of mine who doesn't have kids, who was married, didn't want to have kids, said like, she's based on me, right? And she was very flattered. And I said, not necessarily, but like she. I mean, that's the thing with fiction and real life, that oftentimes someone, you might base something on a real person and the person like totally can't see it, and then when somebody isn't based on anyone, so the person will be like, I know I was your inspiration.
Does that happen to you often in other cases?
Yeah, it has. Well, yeah, it's happened fair, like, yeah, the most sort of glaring example was in my first novel, Prep. There's this sort of like heartthrob boy named Cross Sugarman. And so I had gone to boarding school, which the book is not autobiographical, but it's the school is sort of based on the school that I went to. And then, but when I finished the book and when it sold, I was teaching at a boys' prep school in Washington, D.C. And at some point, there's a person who was a student there when I was a teacher there, which is like 2005. Is like, he's somewhat famous, I guess you'd say, and he was one I interviewed, and he said, oh yeah, it's a composite of my friends and me, and I felt like, oh my god, it's definitely not, like, and I was like, he wasn't even my student, yeah, I mean, it just felt like, ugh, but anyway, so that was like the most dramatic example, but definitely people, and the weird thing is, even though there could be some character who's kind of unappealing, and I feel like people might try to claim, like, I don't know, human nature is very complicated, it turns out.
Very strange. Well, speaking of the men of this novel,
And the man, no, just kidding.
I
know.
Man, I hear there's one.
I know, yeah. I did actually when I said, are there any men? And they said there's one.
There's one.
I was curious. I mean, it's fine either way. I was just curious.
I inquired about your eligibility.
I know. Yeah, the odds are very good for you if you're single.
So I don't know how many times I can fall in love with a Darcy character, but I certainly did, and this one all over again. But the one that I just my blood boiled, and there is a particular word for this I don't think I'm allowed to say in here, but it starts with an S and it ends with a boy. But Jasper is just the most infuriating. And while I don't want to put you on the spot to
Is he based on one of my students? No.
But I do think this is a book that is an iteration of a story that we've heard, and also a story that has been told not just in Pride and Prejudice, but the unavailable man trope. But yeah, he's particularly awful.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm not sure. I will say that I think that it would be interesting to know, statistically, so I guess, and I don't know. I also don't know if there's a difference between being gay and heterosexual in regard to, but the very close friendship, or the person that lets you be in love with them for not for a week, but for whatever, a minimum of a year, and it's are they using you for the ego boost? Are they ambivalent? Are they in love with you but scared? And I think no, that's the way. That's what you tell yourself. But anyway, I think that there was a time in my life that I thought that was unusual, even unique, and I think it's very common. But I think almost everyone has. Well, and that's where I'm not. Maybe I don't know almost everyone, but I would say I think 60% of people have one of those. Yeah. You guys can all whisper in my ear if you do, or no, or just make a little sign if you had one of those. Although I also will say I know a few people who married their version of that person, which I can't tell if I feel impressed or horrified or jealous. It was almost they waited and waited and waited, and then it happened. But then by that point you even I know there's particularly there's at least one example I think I can think of too.
How terrifying. Well, it's also it also fits into the next question I wanted to ask you, because I do feel this sort of the waiting thing when we talk about romance novels and slow burn romance novels, even high literary slow burn romance novels. And as I was rereading Eligible, I was also rereading The Marriage Plot, the Jeffrey Jennings book. And I sort of have other people read that book? So. The marriage plot in part is, I felt, predicated on the fact that that plot is dead, but I actually don't think that plot is dead at all. I think we just watch different versions of that plot now, and it certainly plays out in here. And this is not really a question in so much as it is a request for your impressions of that.
Do I think that the marriage plot is alive and well? By the way, I love the novel, The Marriage Plot. There's something, I don't know why this is, but somehow I think that this story of two people being attracted to each other, but not in a way that's totally clear, but it's they're probably attracted to each other, and there's tension, and will they get together or won't they, and there are obstacles. For some reason that's the most interesting story there is, and I can't really almost explain it, because it's almost like my appetite for it is bottomless, and so is everyone else's. And even so, I weirdly, like, if you think about like even TV, like hugely popular TV shows, whether it's like The Wire or Downton Abbey or Mad Men, that really the most intense moments, not exclusively, but most of the most intense moments that make your heart like sort of ache are like romantic moments where it's like, oh, are those two people who've never seen each other romantically going to see each other romantically, or are they going to kiss, or like one of their hearts is broken, and so it just like makes life much more interesting. And I don't know, I mean, obviously romance and marriage are not synonymous, but I think that I don't think that, I mean, just in the sense that it doesn't, like for a story to be romantic, it does not have to end with a wedding, is what I mean. Certainly marriage and romance are not synonymous. That's my short story collection. It's coming out in April. Yeah, I think that it's almost like romance or romantic tension has the form of a plot, like a will they or won't they. It has this momentum, and it has, so I don't think that it's like necessarily people have to inhabit these conventional gender roles, or it has to be about like a celebration of all things wedding for it to be true that it is like a timeless story.
So we've arrived at that moment where I ask you if romantic novels are antithetic to writing feminist novels, which I don't think is the case, but I think you're required to talk about.
It's so funny. I mean, I would say definitely not. No, I mean, I think I don't know. I wouldn't think in terms of like actually I saw something on social media that said Emma Watson, the actress, is like hiding feminist novels in places for readers to stumble upon, and I thought, like, what's a feminist novel? I mean, it's not, I consider myself a feminist, certainly, but I was like, what makes something, is it a female protagonist? A female protagonist who behaves admirably, like how admirably, it's just sort of, so I think that, I mean, I don't know, it's like, I don't really, not, like I would read, if someone said, oh, there's this like crazy article, or this very interesting article about feminism in the New York Times, like of course I would read it. So it's almost like I think there are interesting questions, and it's an interesting time, and like Beyonce is really interesting, but I think that like fiction, it's almost like I feel like fiction and sort of political statements or slogans or whatever are kind of incompatible, and it's almost like we look to fiction for this more nuanced, less black and white version of human behavior, because, I mean, rarely are people all one thing or the other, like all, I mean, we sort of have a president who is all one thing, but it's almost like, but actually that illustrates how unusual it is. Like, he's very, like, unusual as a human being, I mean, in many ways, but it's just like most people are kind of contradictory, and they're like a little of this, a little of that, and yeah, do you want us to go into our, like...
We have the one more, and then we're gonna open it up to you guys. So last but not least, speaking of romance and feminism and all of those fun things, The Bachelor. So I don't watch Bachelor, but I know people watch it, and I've caught episodes of it. I've watched it in passing. I've seen a lot of it. But I love that was your vehicle to a happy ending in this book, and I guess, like, are you watching a lot of The Bachelor?
Well, okay, so I will say, is anyone else in this room, like, shocked that Dean was not given the rose last night? I feel like she made such a mistake. Like, Peter is horrible, and so I think that answer, no, this is what happened. I had never watched The Bachelor in, like, a sustained way. Like, I had seen a little bit, and I felt naively, I thought that it was almost like that the whole thing was like previously on The Bachelor, and then like coming up on The Bachelor, and then it was like literally there was like 40% was that, and then there was, but then, so I thought, okay, I have to, and my sister and one of my sisters and her husband, they like kind of don't have cable, and like almost the only show they watch Patriots games and they watch The Bachelor, and they discuss it. Like I literally, like my brother-in-law is like 17 years older than my sister. We like love him. He's like the most delightful person. But he, like, hearing him, it's like very touching in a way, because he'll just be like, I do not think that Rachel made a good choice. Like, he's just so sincere about, like, he's like a really smart person. So anyway, so I thought, like, I need to be almost like responsible. I need to watch a full season. So I watched the Chris the Farmer season, and then it basically, I kind of like joked that it's like an actor who like starts smoking for a role, and then like 50 years later it's still like, so then I watched Caitlin's season, and then I then like stepped away a little bit, but I've been in I've been in the city where my sister lives recently, and so of course I watch with her and her husband, but I don't, my husband will not be present, and I don't feel like it's very fun to watch alone, even with Twitter. I don't think it's fun, so I don't watch it alone, but I do. But I will say, and I interviewed, there was a friend of a friend had been a producer on The Bachelor, and I said, I have a few questions. I want to make things like factually accurate as much as possible, and like, could we talk for like 20 minutes? And literally, like, he was so generous. Like 2.5 hours later, like we got, and he had been, and so a lot of the information, like, I think that everything in there about the show Eligible is realistic, and some of it is like essentially directly from this guy's mouth, where it would be like me saying, okay, what would happen in this situation, or what would, and even the weird thing is, watching The Bachelor now, like I have a lot of respect for the producers as storytellers, not necessarily as human beings, but as like in terms of constructing narrative. They're good at it. And there's not as much filler as I thought in like the previously on and next up, and yeah. Anyway, do you guys have questions?
Yeah. Does anybody have a question? We have mics on two sides of the room, so raise your hand.
Speaking of The Bachelor, did you model Chip Bingley after Travis Stork?
So, I mean, yes and no. So Travis Stork was a Bachelor, like maybe in, I don't know, 2007-ish or something. And I feel like I saw, again, I saw maybe half an episode that he was on. I will say I thought he was the handsomest of all the Bachelors, and he was a doctor, and then he did go on to have a reality or a kind of doctor roundtable show. So in that sense, I did obviously borrow some details, but I don't see Chip's personality as being based on his at all, just because I didn't have that much familiarity. And someone who's a very faithful Bachelor watcher said to me, did you base like how Chip cries so profusely on this one Bachelor? And I didn't even know who it was. So yeah, so like kind of, but not exactly.
Okay, question over here. It's actually a two-parter.
So the first question I have is why you decided to close the book with a piece by Mary when the rest of the book has not really had her voice.
Yeah.
The second question is, did you find it harder to work with fully developed characters and plot than to develop characters and plot on your own?
Those are very good questions. So the reason I decided to end with Mary, and I'll say, I think based on reader feedback, I think probably like maybe 65% of readers don't really like it, and then like 45, no, just kidding, 35% do, 70% do. But I decided there's two reasons. Like one, I think that I, as a reader, and I sat with like actually not one but two copies of Pride and Prejudice on my desk the whole time I was writing. Like, it's like, what is going on with Mary? Like, I feel like it's not really explained. Although there is, I don't know if is it with Random House? There is a novel coming out from Mary's point of view. When and what's it called? What month? Okay, so, and do you know the title of the author?
Mary
Mary B. Catherine Chen. Okay, wow. I haven't read it, but I've heard about it. But I think that I also have this kind of like perverse impulse where when I write a book to almost be like, well, this is the thing that this book is preoccupied and these characters are preoccupied with, but like obviously not everyone sees it that way. Like not everyone cares about those things, and I kind of like just went with that. I mean, I was definitely. I feel like I had contact with a few British editors, and one of the British editors was saying like, "Are you sure?" And I said, "Yeah, like I'm sure." But I don't know. I just thought it was sort of like it put things in perspective a little bit. And then the question of whether it was easier to like make up my own characters and plot or take the existing ones. I wouldn't say that one is easier or harder than the other. Like it's just different. And my book American Wife is this fictional retelling of the life of Laura Bush, and so in that way it's sort of like I borrowed from real life obviously for that, and that's the most comparable to Eligible, not really in subject or tone but just in structure almost or origins. But it's almost like if you're doing that you have to decide. If you're borrowing, you have to decide how much to borrow and what to leave. And I think that Eligible is definitely, it's almost like it's having this dialogue with the reader even more than most books do, where it's saying, I assume you have some familiarity with Pride and Prejudice, and I'm going to fulfill some of your expectations, and I'm going to like deviate from your other ones, and because you wouldn't want it to be so faithful that you knew exactly what was going to happen. That would be like disappointing and boring. And so there's you're still selecting the way you're selecting when you make things up. But of course I just always base all my fiction on my former students at the boys prep school. So anyway, I never really make anything up.
Okay. So connected to that question, I know there was a lot of conversation at our table of the fact that you finished with Mary being this feminist theme. Do you see that? Because it sounds like you kind of separate fiction from feminism. So do you just throw Mary in as like a surprising ending, or did you want to tie in the fact that you think that's the appropriate way to be a feminist?
I mean, I wouldn't say that I see Mary as like a role model or not a role model. I mean, I feel like I wouldn't want to be friends with her. Like, I think in some ways I feel like there are some traits that I think I'd probably like share with her, but then there's other, but I don't, it's not like, I don't, I guess, object to someone saying that, does this novel have like a feminist message, or is it a feminist novel? Like, I can see why that's an interesting conversation. It's more that I think that if I were trying to convey some message that could be like distilled down, I think I should write a nonfiction essay that's like 1,000 words, or like an opinion piece for the New York Times, which I have done. I don't think I should write a novel to convey like a political message. And so I also I feel like if someone asks you or asks me to describe my own novels or my own writing, that and I hope that this is not like almost like the Jane Austen, like, here's her writing, but I don't think that I'm necessarily a very credible source, where I think it's like being asked to describe your own personality, where like you sort of have a handle on who you are, but like you sort of don't. And so the questions that you're raising, I think I would feel more comfortable assessing other people's novels in that way than assessing my own. And it's also like, like what, I think that there's such a mysterious combination of factors that makes a person write the novel that she writes, that it's not, I mean, there can be, like, there's obviously we are in this very, and I think, again, my short stories that are coming out, like, I think there's a lot with, like, gender going on, and it's like, it starts with a story where two characters, it's like before the 2016 election, and then it ends with a story that's like clearly after the election, and like all that stuff, but it's not, I mean, if I want to say something, like, actually, so this sort of a long-winded way of answering this, but prior to the 2016 election, partly because I had written this book, American Wife, I was invited to write essays repeatedly about Hillary Clinton. And I just thought, I don't have almost anything to say that has not been said like many different ways and times before. Like I just like and I'm now writing a novel about Hillary Clinton because I actually feel like weirdly I have stuff to say in fiction, but I don't where it's like written in the first person. As Hillary, like it's when I gave that speech at Wellesley in 1969. Doesn't that sound good? No. So it's almost like fiction allows you to go very deep in this way that, like, I think can't be reduced. And if it can be reduced, it should, because it shouldn't be a novel.
We have a question over here. Yeah, so to go back to the point about, it would be boring to read Pride and Prejudice written the exact same way that it was written, originally. At the same time, when I read it, I felt, and we talked about this a little bit over here, a lot of echoes in sentence structure, in your style, in the way that you described things or worded things that, brought me back to the original. How did you go about writing this in a way that is, I think very true to the original, but still really different? What was your writing process?
So I did, have these copies of Pride and Prejudice on my desk, and I thought to myself, one was my one from high school, and then one was like a newer one. But I thought to myself initially, I won't try to make my language Austen-like at all, because that'll be like as if I were speaking in an English accent, and it'll be really cringe-inducing. And then so I would sometimes think okay, I'm gonna sort of go off like this chapter in Pride and Prejudice, and I would reread it. And I felt like her language in this sort of pleasing way infected me, or I couldn't fight the force of it. So I did find myself using these words like vex or besmirch, or words that I would never use in my own books. And so, but I think that a little of it goes a long way. So if you were actually looking at the words, there aren't that many. It's almost like if you're writing about, people using the word that a little of it goes a long way. You don't really want to do it the way people do it. So it's not, the language is not really Austen-like, but it's sort of, suggestive of Austen. But the very nitty-gritty thing I did was I first went through Pride and Prejudice and wrote an outline of all 61 chapters, and was like, this is the 2 to 4 sentence version of what happens in each chapter. And I thought that I would do a 1-to-1 relationship where Eligible would have 61 chapters, but I then realized that once I veered off course in chapter 8, I couldn't just go back to her chapter 9, and so then I made a completely separate outline. So I would go between, mostly I would look at my own outline, but that was sort of a breakthrough in the writing process when I realized that I had to build my own story and almost just use her. So I've sometimes heard people say, when people who are doing a lot of research for fiction, that it's almost like you shouldn't take notes. You should just just take what you remember. And I felt like in some way, I did refer to Pride and Prejudice a lot, but sometimes I was just kind of thinking about, well, what are the biggest things, the biggest moments that I want to take away from it?
This is going to be the last question, but then Curtis will be signing books, so you can ask her. She sent you
all the questions. And remember, you have to tell me if you had a Jasper. Remember, you should keep a tally.
Cool. Well, thank you so much. My question is in regards to one of the earlier things that was mentioned about the issue of trans, as well as some of the socioeconomic issues that were relevant and that are still relevant in today's age, particularly not just about Ham, but also the Black realtor narrative and kind of how that plays in, as well as Mrs. Bennet's own biases of realizing that she has Jewish heritage. But then, what was kind of the inspiration or the thought process for including some of those elements?
So I felt like I mean, I feel like, for example, Mrs. Bennet is clearly like a, you know, racist, sexist, homophobic person, which, like, I think that it's, and people have different views of this, but I feel like there are, I mean, as if it was ever a secret, it's certainly not a secret now, like, that there are people like that in the world. And so, I mean, I think that, like, some people did say to me, did you include a transgender character because that's sort of in the zeitgeist right now? And I said, like, one, a novel has such a long lead time, you can't really capture the zeitgeist. It's not like a magazine article. But I feel like I put a transgender person in the novel because there are transgender people in the world, and weirdly, it's sort of the inverse of that. That I feel like, you know, I definitely know plenty of like racist white people who make these sort of I mean, they wouldn't identify as racist, but they would make these, you know, eyebrow raising like whether she's saying about their housekeeper, like, oh, she wouldn't appreciate a cashmere sweater or something like that. So to me, I actually do try to be, like, I think one of my guiding principles is realism. And in another of my novels, there's this act of, like, I mean, this is a very different example, but there's this act of, like, marital infidelity. And a lot of readers express great disappointment with it. And I feel like I do not write novels where the characters are meant to be moral role models, and like that's like a very clear. There are novels like that. I don't think I read them either, but they exist, and so but I feel like I would definitely. Even I shouldn't, like, here I am in the bosom of Random House, like I should never steer people away from buying my book, but I do think that, like, you know, different readers have different comfort levels, and even like for me, like I can read a book and think like, okay, that person exists in the world, but I know it, and I think I like realistic fiction, but I don't, that like voice annoys me, or that repels me, or I've been around enough people like that in real life. But so it's like kind of I mean, what you're asking is a good question and a complicated question, and I think that different, I don't know, there's different combinations of qualities that different readers can sort of like withstand, or like see serving a purpose or not see serving a purpose, but it's all kind of subjective. All right, thank you.
On that
so
note,
much.
thank you. Thank you, Elizabeth and Curtis.